Hey, everybody, I'm Jason Mefford, and I'm here with Brad Miller. And we're talking about walking a spiritual path. Only from the title today, you might be thinking, hold it, this is more like a Jamming with Jason podcast because it's titled The
Yeah.
Dark Side of the Moon, right? Dark Side of the Moon, great song, or
hmm
great album and great song. But yeah, we're gonna talk about that today. And Brad, you kind of brought it up because again, I
hmm
think some people looking at it would be like, why are we going to be talking about this? What's going
Yeah.
on here? How does this have to do with anything spiritual related? So
Yeah.
let's kind of
So
cue them in and then we can have our discussion.
yeah, so we'll start by saying we're not talking about the song. Like if again, that's Jam with Jason episode. It's a different podcast. So if you want to hear about that, um, I'm sure Jason can deal with that on a different time. But today the idea is that I know a lot of topics we've talked about through the different podcast episodes, and I think this is something like episode 40 already. But we talk a lot about recognizing signals, signs, using your intuition, being able to expand and grow and evolve and all these other great things. And if you are, I'm guessing if you listen to this episode, if this podcast, you probably are also listen to maybe other podcasts dealing with spirituality or look at other things online, or, you're just kind of in that world. And so you probably hear a lot of people saying all these great things and how you need to do the love and light and all this other stuff. But one thing that doesn't get really talked about a lot, but I think is actually probably more important than all this other stuff, is kind of the dark stuff, the dark side of things, the working on the stuff, the shadow work, working inside you, to help you grow and evolve. Like it's just not, snap your fingers and all of a sudden, oh look, I'm evolved now. I'm enlightened. I'm enlightened. That's not how it works. You got to work through your shit. And
Yeah.
so I figured that'd be important. Something we could talk about today is about the fact you got to work through your shit, all the dark stuff inside you. It's important
Yeah.
that you go through it.
Well, and I'm kind of excited to see where this is going to go today too, because there's light and there's dark.
Mhm.
Right. And again, so everybody, when we're talking about dark, we're not talking necessarily about dark magic. We might go there a little bit, but we're not talking about like embracing dark magic and going there. But the fact
Mhm.
that there is light and there is dark as well in the world, and you can't be so naive to believe that there isn't darkness out there as well. But darkness also helps you in your light evolvement, right? So one thing that I was told or taught, as well, is that we can truly see in the darkness. And that seems a little counterintuitive, right? Because the way our 3D eyes work is we require light and the reflection of that light to be able to physically see, right? But but because of that, we're blinded by what is not bright and we can't see in the shadows sometimes, right? And I'm talking about shadow work, but I'm talking about other shadows too. Okay, for people that are like to read between the lines on this, right? And we might go there, we might not. Who knows, right? But what's interesting is and again, you might say, "Oh, you guys are just full of it," right? But I will tell you that there have been times when I have closed my eyes at night. So I have a little routine that I go through at night when I lay down to go to sleep. And usually it's dark, right? I mean, sometimes I have a candle or a night light going, so it's still a little bit light. I mean, it's not complete pitch
Right.
darkness,
hmm
right? But there have been times when I close my eyes to go to sleep, or maybe close my eyes when I'm meditating, and it's brighter when I have my eyes closed than when my eyes are open, right? In fact, I remember one specific time, and this isn't just me because I've shared this with other friends, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that happens to me too," right? Where I it was dark in the room, I closed my eyes to relax and go to sleep, and I'm like, "Did I forget to turn off a light? Because it sure is bright in here." And then I'm like, "Hold it, my eyes are closed. What?" Okay. Um, And so, again, there is benefit in looking or seeing in the darkness, because that's when a lot of times you see things that you can't see with your 3D eyes. And so that's one reason why a lot of people, when they meditate, they'll actually close their eyes, right? Not just to reduce the physical stimulation, but it's amazing when you start peering into the darkness, what you can actually see.
Can't see. No.
And you don't have to be afraid of it, right? I mean, so again, here's one of these indoctrinations. We're taught to be afraid of the dark. As a little
Right.
kid,
This creepiness in the dark, the monsters in the dark.
yeah, how many kids are afraid of the dark, right? There's monsters, there's other stuff going on. You don't need to fear the dark, right? In fact, like you said, if we're not actually going there, then we can't evolve as much as we could, because whether we want to believe it or not, there's darkness in all of us. There's shadows in all of us. There are things that we haven't dealt with, maybe that have been suppressed. And a lot of times you've heard about like the onion, or there's an analogy of an onion, right? You peel one layer, there's another layer. You got to keep peeling until you get down to where it really has to be. But if you're not willing to look at some of those things, and again, the shadow, I think Jung used that from a psychology perspective. And other people, I was trying to remember if there's some other terms too, but the kind of the shadow self that we do have to deal with and work on as well, to be able to kind of cleanse out that darkness, if you will, so that more light can fill us. Because if we don't get rid of the dark spots, there's no space for additional light.
Yeah, and I haven't brushed up on my Jung lately, but I think when he was talking about kind of the shadow stuff, is like the repressed things that we have in there, things from childhood, or things in life that we're trying to forget, those emotions that we allow to push down, we don't express because for whatever reason we don't feel like we can or whatever, and we just kind of hide them down, and all that kind of stuff that needs to be brought to the light. So like you said, you've got room for more good stuff in there.
Well, and it's an important thing too, right? I mean, again, the analogy of the cup, right? If your cup runneth over, then you have no more room for stuff in your cup. And part of our cup, if you will, our light being, our soul, or whatever you want to call it, part of that has some darkness in it that needs to be cleared out. Now, that could be from this life, it could be from previous lives. All right. But you can't make more room. You can't make room for more light without getting rid of some of the dark. And so you've got to get rid of the dark, and you've got to replace with the light, right? Because just getting rid of the darkness adds a void. And so if you don't replace the void with light and with something that you want to put in there, then it just allows things to come back in.
More darkness comes back.
More darkness to come back in, or that same thing maybe pops up again for you, right? So maybe we should talk a little bit about, because some people might be saying, well, you guys are talking about darkness, but what do you mean? What do you mean, right? And I know, so Brad, I know this topic kind of came up for you because you've seen like three different things kind of related to this shadow work. So maybe we should kind of share with people what this actually looks like, or what some examples of this are, so they can start thinking about, what to do.
So yeah, so like I said, this is something that came up this week to me in a couple different instances where I've was reading about things, and the idea of the concept of shadow work, of working on yourself, kind of popped up. Looking through some Instagram posts and things like that, and generally my Instagram posts, things that I look through, are very positive. They're pretty pictures, and I mean, there's maybe some motivational kind of stuff, and things like that. But some, the idea, a couple times actually, people mentioned the idea of shadow work, about working on yourself, about kind of getting in and dealing with the darkness. And then this morning, I know we've talked about this before, but every morning I pick an animal card from animal medicine. And today's card was the Black Panther. And the Black Panther talks about, or goes towards, the darkness inside you and facing that, embracing that darkness so that you can work through it, and kind of process it. I know we talked about the idea of transmuting things like that, be able to move it into that light. And so those are things that for me are coming up, and I might have to disappoint Jason a little bit, because I don't necessarily have any examples off the top of my head, because this is something that is just coming to me here. That things I need to figure out what I need to work on. I'm not sure yet what that's going to look like. But
Well,
there's
let's
definitely
talk
something
about
there.
it. Let's talk about it, right? Okay,
Back on the
because
chair and
yeah,
get
no, yeah, we're talking about Yin, right? Yeah, Brad, would you lie down on the couch, please? Let's have a little session here. No,
Mhm.
um, and so there are a few different places that we can go with this, but I'll try to make it really simple for people. Is David R. Hawkins came up with, or he kind of documented based on some work that he did, kind of the scale of consciousness. Okay, and so really in there's certain emotions that when we feel are kind of at a certain hertz frequency, if you will. Okay, and so when we say things like low vibration emotions, high vibration emotions, that's what we're talking about, right? Shame would be an example of a low vibration, low frequency emotion. Love is a high one, right? And on that scale of consciousness, it's kind of a 0 to 1,000 on the scale. And really kind of everything below courage. So courage is, I think, at 200, somewhere in that range. All of the emotions below courage can be defined as low vibrational, or maybe, again, good, bad. Those are tough terms to use, but we might say they're bad, right? So things like
Negative, something like that. Yeah.
shame, guilt, fear, some of those things, right?
Anger.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anger. But once you get to the courage level, kind of courage, or another one is kind of a boredom, right? Where you're kind of apathetic. You're in the middle. You're not feeling one way or the other about it. But once you get up to that level, now all of a sudden it starts, becoming beneficial for you. Okay. And again, not that those lower emotions don't benefit us in some way. Believe me, there's secondary gain for a lot of them. That's why people get stuck in their shit down there, right? But one way to think about facing the darkness is looking at it from an emotion perspective, right? Because a lot of times the shadows that we feel or that we have are repressed emotions that we keep pushing down. And so, as an example, if I have a bunch of shame, or I have a bunch of anger, or I have a bunch of fear that I'm shoving down in my body, right, and I'm not dealing with it, I'm just shoving it down, that's taking up valuable real estate, right? And so what we've got to do is kind of evict those things out of our life so that we can make room for these higher vibration emotions: love, peace, joy, enlightenment, right? These kinds of things that we need to make room for. So so on one very simplistic level, we can think about it that way. So like you said, Black Panther, facing the darkness, right, is, a lot of times we are held back because of these repressed lower emotions. And so part of facing it is identifying it, asking yourself questions about it, and releasing it, letting go, and no longer holding to that, kind of cutting those things out of our identity, right? So So again, you can think about, because usually these things, and you kind of ask questions. I'm actually reading one of David Hawkins' books right now too. It's Letting Go. It's a great book, where he kind of talks about this. But I'll just kind of give you some guidelines, maybe for kind of thinking about it from an emotion perspective and how you can deal with it. Right? Is, well, maybe what comes up is something happens and I feel ashamed. Right? Because typically what happens, there's some trigger that goes on, and what it does is it kind of activates or pops up one of these repressed things, right? And so something happens and all of a sudden I feel ashamed. And so now I can start asking myself questions like, well, why do I feel ashamed? Right? And you can start asking your questions about it, right? Of, well, what's causing that, or why do I feel ashamed? Oh, well, because when I was little, this and this and this happened, and somebody in my life, again, some authority figure, parents, teachers, religious leaders, whatever, somebody probably at some point, and I know they did in my life, right? They were well-meaning, but certain people like to shame you, right? And again, their thought is, well, I'm trying to make you feel bad about yourself so you'll do better. You'll do
Right. So you'll
better next
change.
time.
Yeah. So
So
you don't
you'll
want to feel that
change,
again.
right? Yeah. So I know that a lot of people who do that, or the type of people that shame people, a lot of times they have a good intention. Now, other times they don't have a good intention, and they just want to control you and make you feel like a piece of shit, and control you and lord over you, right? And again, but regardless, we don't need to feel shame, right? And so, again, as you start looking at that and seeing that, maybe certain experiences will pop up. Now, what you have to do is you have to change that feeling that you had around shame to something else, right? So again, I'm making this stuff up. Okay, I'm making it up. It's all for explanatory purposes. But let's say that maybe something happened in my life, and an experience came up with a teacher in grade school, and maybe that grade school teacher made me feel ashamed, or they did something that made me feel like, oh, I'm not a good boy. I didn't do as good as I could. I'm ashamed of what I did. Right. And shame goes back a lot of times to sins, too, from a religious standpoint. Right. Like,
Yep.
oh, sinner, sinner, sinner. Oh, I'm so ashamed, for that. Right. And all this popped in. So here we go. More information than y'all probably wanted to know. But growing up in the religious tradition that I did, masturbation, that's a sin, right? You're only supposed to have sex with people that you're married to, right? Well, masturbation is a normal thing. I mean, I'm sorry, but we're all human. Anybody, I would place a lot of money on this, that everyone in the world has masturbated, right? Some
At
of
some
us
point. Yeah.
do at some point in your life. Everybody has masturbated, right? Some more than others, but again, regardless, and no
No
judgment,
judgment. Yeah.
because again, masturbation it's a normal thing, right? But I was taught that it was a sin. And so every time as a horny little teenager, I would masturbate, I would feel like I am worthless. I can't believe that I can't control that, and I'm sinning, and blah, 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 right? Well, that's absolutely not true, right? It's a normal human function. It's pleasurable. Now, obviously, if I'm just, wanking off, 20 times a day, that's an addiction, and it's not a good thing, right?
And probably painful too, if I had to
And
guess. But
20 times a day to probably be painful, right?
yeah,
So I guess I was going from a fake thing that I was going to make up to a real one. Here you go. Welcome to the
that'll teach you.
podcast, right?
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast. Okay, so and for most of my life, right? I was taught that, and every time that I would masturbate, I would feel bad about it. I'd feel ashamed, right?
Mhm.
But that was a darkness, that was a shadow, and that was an indoctrination that was absolutely not true, right? And so what I had to do was actually look at it like the Black Panther tells you to do, right? And say,
Mhm.
well, is what my parents and what my religious leaders told me, is that really true? No, it's not, right? Masturbation is normal. It's pleasurable. There's nothing about it that makes anyone a freak if they do it, right? If they do it, if they don't do it, it doesn't matter, right? So I had to start kind of facing that and training myself to twist it in another way, right? Now, again, it depends on how far down this you want to go, but you could also do things like, I remember my mother, my sex education in our house was, here's a book, go read it, kind of a thing. And so I remember my mom got this book and she went through and read it first. And of course, she read it, she underlined, she wrote things in the margin. And I remember this, and it's relevant to this story. This is what we're talking about, because when I get to this one point, and he says something about masturbation, he says, a lot of younger people like to do it. It kind of mimics what lovemaking is like from a feeling perspective. Yeah, no kidding, right? Because when you orgasm, hey, that's what it feels like when you have sex too. Um, and I remember she'd underlined a bunch of stuff, and then in the margins wrote something like masturbation is a sin, you should never do this, or something like that. Okay. Now I could sit there and I could be mad at my mom for doing that. I can't believe, I could point fingers at her, but I know my mother's intention was good,
Mhm.
right? She was not trying to shame me. Uh, I don't know if she knew I did or not. She probably did. Every parent knows when their kid's masturbating, right? But
Why is your bedroom door closed? Like,
why is your bedroom door closed? Right?
right?
Why are you spending so long in the bathroom? Right?
Mhm.
Um, but so instead, right? I mean, I could harbor not just feelings of shame, but I could harbor resentment, some other negative emotions towards my mother, like, I can't believe that you made me feel that way. Well, first off, she didn't make me feel that way, right? She just said something. I chose how I was going to take it. I chose to feel
Right.
ashamed. So I have to take responsibility for that, right? But on the flip side, too, instead of feeling anything like that for my mother, I can replace that and say, you know what? I am so grateful that I had a mother who cared so much for me that she took the time to read the book. She took the time to go through and mark in the margins and tell me to the best of her ability what she felt was right.
Mhm.
Now that's a totally different space, right?
Yep.
And that replaces maybe any judgment, any whatever that I might have felt towards my mother from doing that. And the same thing for me from a shame perspective, right? Is just like, well, no, I'm grateful that I have a body that actually works, right?
Mhm.
That when I masturbate, it actually feels good and everything works down there, right? Um, okay, so here's a funny thing, right? Because okay, now I guess I got to share with everybody, right? Because it's so funny. But again, growing up in the tradition that I did, right, we'd have to go see the clergy leaders and we'd have to confess our sins and things like that, right? And I remember this one bishop, because that was in the Mormon faith, kind of what the preacher, the head of your local area is called, right? And so I remember one time he told us this funny thing. He said, you have to really be careful about the way you ask questions, when you're doing stuff, because he says, some people might ask, do you have a problem with masturbation? Right? Meaning, are you masturbating, right? Do you need to confess about masturbating? He said, the problem with that question is, the answer is nope, works just fine. Works fine every time. I don't have a problem with it. So, but anyway, right? I mean, and so that's a shadow area that I had to work on, right? Because for most of my, all my teenage years, most of my adult life, I was still kind of taught, like, well, you're married now, so you don't have a need to masturbate. You should only have sexual relations with your wife, right? But hey, I lived in, periods of sexless marriage, right? And it's like I'm a human, right? I need to clean out the pipes every so often. And doing that, right, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing to feel ashamed of. It's not a sin, right? And so now that I've faced that shadow and I've worked on it again, there's probably more layers to it, but at least I've knocked off some of the top layers of it. And so now when I share that story, like about my mom with the book, there's no emotion associated with it. There's no feelings of shame. Hell, I'm talking about masturbation on this podcast right now, right? Years ago, I would have never even told people that I did that thing, right? Because that's just dirty, right? Was what I was taught. But so you can see that, again, even going through that, it's removing some of the darkness. It's facing a shadow. It's allowing more light to come in. It's allowing myself to change the stories, to change the identity behind something like that, right? So that's kind of an example from thinking about it from an emotional perspective.
Well, I don't think anyone expected to go that.
I didn't expect to go there either. Hey, welcome to the podcast, right?
Sex talk with Jason today.
I know, right?
Didn't think we were going that way, but I mean, I would have just, could have gone someplace more like, oh, my parents taught me that, money was evil, and
yeah, that's where most people go. But it's like, why not?
But Jason's not like most people. Jason's like, psh,
no.
hold my drink. We're going.
And you know what? I mean, it's I know how much pain I went through because of that. And I'm sure lots of other people are dealing with the same thing.
Sure.
Right. And so it's like, why not be real about it with something that actually I had to deal with? In some ways I probably still have to deal with. It'll keep popping its head up in different ways. But at least if you knock the big stuff off, it's like a big rock. You're taking making a lot of space, right, by taking off some of those top layers, because it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you go too, right? I mean, that's the other thing about the onion example. When you start on the outside layer, the onion's really big. You peel it off, the onion gets smaller, it gets smaller, it gets smaller, it gets smaller, right? So each time that you're dealing with it, it doesn't necessarily take as much time or effort either, because you're not dealing with as much of it being left.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, thank you for using an example, because I'm sure that people are like, well, if Jason had that problem and that's something he's been dealing with, my issues of, whatever are nothing compared to that. Like it's an example. Like it's the idea that, what is personal is general, and what is general is personal. So the things that you see are personal to you, personal problems, everybody has them. Everybody has problems, with the way their parents taught them about, can I masturbate? Can I have sex? Those kind of things, those are general problems. Everybody faces those.
Yeah. Well, and I would bet at least 90% of the people listening to this were taught that masturbation is wrong and masturbation is a sin.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, that's what my family did most too. People are taught. Yeah.
It's kind of the religious feel of it that, there's some things that are considered dirty or wrong, and like you said, it's not that they were trying to be mean about it or hurtful about it, but they were trying, what they thought was helping. This is what they honestly believed, and so they wanted to pass on those beliefs to try to help us. I mean, that's one of the roles of parents, as I'm finding with my daughter, is to kind of pass on values and, kind of core beliefs to them, that they can then build their own stuff off of as they grow older and are able to, kind of make their own decisions on these things. And that's what the same thing our parents did. They felt that this was something very important that you shouldn't do. And so they were trying to help us in their way by saying, this is bad, you shouldn't do this, this is a sin. Um, and so forgiveness of that is something that's is a big part of working through this darkness. um
Well, and I think too, I mean, so thanks, Brad, for bringing this up today too, because it's also, I think so many people that are on a spiritual path, that they get on it and they're trying to do all these things, they're meditating, they're thinking good thoughts, they're trying to be high vibrational from an emotion perspective, but all of that work doesn't amount to much incremental change. And I think one of the big reasons for that is there's not a lot of room left, because if you haven't dealt with the shadow, you can't fill it up anymore, right? And so again, you have to face some of these things. And so, for everybody listening, I don't know, just find something this week. Find something this week that's a shadow that you're going to face, that you're going to reprogram, that you're going to release and let go of, and no longer let it have control or power over you. And when you sweep that out of your soul, then those other things are going to come in and be able to give you a lot more of the light back into your life.
Yeah, I would say look for things that trigger you. So the stuff that really gets you under your skin, that really bug you, that cause you to have an emotional reaction, those are the kind of things there's something there to work on. If somebody says something, you get really angry or upset. Like, I know that with my daughter, she likes to take her time with things. And so I feel like I'm always constantly saying, hurry up, come on, you got to get moving, get going, and it kind of, so for me, it's, why is that? Why is there such a big thing on me about hurrying and moving and, not dawdling and all that kind of stuff? So those are great places to start, I think.
Well, it's places where you can start asking yourself questions, right? Is it's like, so why does that bother you that she does that? Right. And so when you start asking that, then you start getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And, again, some of it probably comes to a control issue, but it may not even necessarily be what you think it is. Right. And as you start asking these deeper questions, then you start peeling it back. Again, I don't know what the answer is for you, Brad, for that particular thing, but I know for a lot of people, especially with their kids, it ends up going back often to how everybody else will view us as a parent, and our worth as a human being. What are the neighbors going to think? And our wanting approval from other people. But again, it's like, well, why do I care about their approval? Why do I want that approval? What does that approval give me? Right. And because a lot of times when you start digging into it, it's still giving you a secondary gain that's negative. It's negative in its nature. Sure. Right. Because at the end of the day, why do people want to do that? Because I want to feel proud of what I've done. Well, pride is still one of those negative emotions. Right. And so, can you move yourself up? And one kind of trick to it is, again, if you're feeling shame, which is one of the lowest emotions that you can feel, you have to move yourself up the ladder. Right. And so one thing that I'll tell people sometimes too is, well, can you take something like shame and start thinking about it in different ways and move up some of those negative emotions until you get to the point where you're just angry. You're angry that you would even feel that way, or that people in your life would make you feel that way. And you're just pissed off about it, right? Now, don't hang out in that space for a long time, because that's still a negative
Sure.
place.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get to there, it's easier to start jumping up to the courage of, hey, you know what? That was what I was taught, but I don't have to believe that. I'm fully empowered to be able to help fix myself and no longer have that. Well, now you've jumped up again, right? Now you're to courage.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now can you start getting up to gratitude? Like I said, with the example with my mom, right? I don't need to be angry with my mom. When she first wrote that and I read that when I was like 12 years old, yeah, I was pissed, right? I'm like, how dare you do that? It feels good. I'm gonna keep doing it because I like it. But at the same point, I felt ashamed about it too, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to be angry with her about it, but I can move to a place of gratitude. But again, if you start at shame, jumping from shame to gratitude is a big leap. It's like
Mm-hmm.
trying to go up the ladder, 5 steps. Yeah, you can jump one or two, maybe, depending on how far apart they are. But if you try to jump from the bottom to the fifth one, it ain't going to happen. So stair step your way
Mm-hmm.
up to it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good, yeah, because I I think a lot of people, trying to go from the shame, the really low stuff, and all of a sudden like, hey, I want to be enlightened now. Well, it doesn't quite work
It
that
doesn't
way.
work
You
that
can't
way.
like go from, the bottom floor up to the penthouse. You kind of have to go up all the different floors till you get up there. And sometimes, like you said, you have to hit up you have to stop at the seventh floor first and hang out there for a few minutes and maybe switch elevators and get on another one and then take the next one up. And,
Well, and
you know,
and especially if you're in some taller buildings, right? You have to be careful. You have to know which elevator bank to go to,
mhm.
because all the elevators don't go to the same place, right? And so
Yep.
in that way, it's kind of like, okay, you got to start at this one. You got to get to the seventh floor. You move over, you go to the next elevator, you go up to the
Yep.
15th floor, you go to another elevator, you go up to the 30th floor, right? And so
Mhm.
it's kind of like that too in what we're talking
Mhm.
about. Mhm.
So yeah, so I think we've talked a lot about things that people had no clue that they're going to get into today.
Well, then we
Um,
probably for today, that's a lot for them to kind of think about.
right. Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
yeah.
But it's important. I mean, this stuff is, I mean, like we talk about all the fun stuff and spiritual involvement and growth, I think is a great thing, but you have to be aware that this is the work that you've got to do to get there. Like you can't just say, all right, tomorrow I'm going to be enlightened or I'm going to be at peace. Like you've got to work through this other crap before you can get there. Cause like you said, you got to clear the space for it. You've got to open up space so that you can have those other things and have the actual growth. And some of the stuff is scary stuff you don't want to deal with. Like it's painful stuff that you don't want to deal with. But if you don't deal with it, you can't move up.
Well, and it kind of goes back to, I'll just throw this out there because it popped in here, is a lot of times people that are on the path want other people to acknowledge their progress and are
Mm-hmm.
doing some things to be seen by others in a good light.
Mm-hmm.
That's called spiritual ego. Okay. And that's damning, right? Because again, you think you're being all enlightened, but really your intention and what's behind everything is
Mm-hmm.
pride,
Right.
because you want to be proud of how other people view you. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of this work that we're talking about and a lot of the work in general that we talk about on this podcast is you just do it for yourself. You
It's
don't
behind the
tell
scenes
anybody.
work.
It's behind the scenes work. The behind the scenes work is so much more important
Yep.
than anything else. And so, again, if you're truly committed to your evolvement and growth, you shouldn't give a damn what anybody else thinks about what you're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
you shouldn't care for or want anybody to even know what you're doing. Right? Because
Right.
it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that's what your intention is or that's what your desire is, then you're really barking up the wrong tree.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So All right, so there's the dark side of the moon. At least one episode, kind of talking about facing the darkness, clearing out the
Yeah.
darkness. Because again, if you don't clear it out, the incremental is going to be so much less on all the other work that you're doing. So don't be afraid of it. There's no monsters in the dark. Or I'm going to say that for now. We'll maybe talk about it later in a different way. But in actually that we can start to see much more clearly in the dark than we actually can in the light too, because our eyes play tricks on us. But when you truly perceive and see in the darkness, you're not tricked either. So, and that's probably more for another episode too.
More for
in the
another
future.
episode.
Yeah,
Tune in
so there
next
we
time
go.
for
Tune in next time or one time, I don't know, it could be a year from now. Keep listening and it'll come up when you need to hear it.
that's right. If you want to learn more about it, you got to keep listening, because you never know when we might come back to it. Or so like you just got to have to listen next week, and maybe we'll throw in some more stuff about it, or maybe not. You just never know. So you just have to listen to them all. What can I tell you? All the way to the end.
Yep.
So all right. Well, thank you guys for listening today. Hopefully Jason's stories haven't scared you away too much, because there's a lot of really good stuff in there. I mean, if you really sit down and think about it and kind of work through it, there's a lot of really good tips and stuff in that. So hopefully you guys take that to heart and found some value out of Jason sharing with us today. I know I did.
Well, good. And yeah, don't be afraid. Find something, find one thing this week that kind of scares you, that would be a shadow kind of thing, and just work on it. And get it done, at least get the outside layer off, and you're going to be a lot further along in your involvement by the end of the week. I mean, if you can pick one thing every week that you work on, before you know it, you're going to totally feel like a different person. And I know, because that's what I've done too. So all right, so have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Catch you later.
See ya.